Welcome to Life in Biology. I'm Dr. Joel Graff. This is episode 17. We're going to be talking about how processed foods taste so good we forgot about the fiber. So normally it's not very polite conversation to talk about bacteria in your gut, or more aptly the bacteria coming out of your gut. But scientists these days have feces fever. And this is for good reason. Differences in the bacteria in your gut can cause big changes in whether you become obese or not. It causes big changes in how your immune system responds to things. It can even cause changes in your behavior. Those bacteria in your gut, you wouldn't think they could do that, but they do. Now, scientists have gotten really good at looking at bacteria coming out of the gut. And one thing they like to do is they like to go around the world and see what kind of bacteria those guys have or these guys have. And so they collect samples from all over the world and then determine what bacteria diversity they have, what types of bacteria, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, here in Western civilization, we're losers. If you compare our gut microbiota to the gut microbiota of people living in, let's say, present day hunter and gatherers, or maybe people living in kind of rural agrarian sorts of situations, they have a much more diverse bacterial population than those of us in the US. So bacteria in your gut are interesting. You also have bacteria all over your body. You've got bacteria in your mouth. You've got bacteria everywhere. And there's a kind of in the news this past week. There was this. Someone said that this old, often quoted statistic of the fact that the idea that there are 10 bacteria cells in your body for every one human cell in your body. That is quoted all the time, but it's been questioned. So someone did a new estimation and they say it's more like 1-to-1. So for every human cell you have, you might have one bacterial cell. However, the 1-to-1 ratio, so whether you're more bacteria or more you, might depend on whether you recently went to the bathroom. However, even though the ratio is better in our favor at this point, unfortunately, we're still losers. And by that I mean you can just count bacteria and compare it to the number of cells in your body. Or let's talk about genomes. The human genome has some 20,000 genes. They can kind of rearrange or do something called splicing that gives you upwards of maybe 100,000 different genes. But the bacteria in your gut have far more than 100,000 different genes. And so if we're comparing our genes versus bacteria genes, the bacteria win. So how do scientists go about studying gut microbiota? Well, they use next generation sequencing, which basically means you get a ton of data. In fact, I've heard that storing the data is actually more costly than just repeating the experiment to get new data. That's how good we're getting at doing sequencing. Now, one way that you can do sequencing is looking at 16S sequence. I won't get into the details on this right now, but 16S sequencing will tell you your bacterial diversity. How many different types of bacteria and what are the relative numbers of each of your different bacteria. The other way that you can go about doing sequencing is sequencing everything. So that's kind of going back to this idea where we were talking about the total number of genes. You can look at the total number of genes that for a specific enzyme or different enzymes or whatnot. And the general rule of thumb when it comes to bacteria in your gut is that the more diversity you have, the healthier you are. So like I said, we have less diversity in the guts of Western people than in the guts of present day hunters and gatherers. So this study that I want to talk about set up an experimental design where they attempted to mimic a Western diet. And by Western diet, that means higher in fats and sugars, but one thing, and that's what's typically meant by a Western diet when scientists are doing this. And what you do is you feed mice with a defined food. However, in this study, they emphasized that in Western diets we have a low fiber intake compared to other populations of people that have higher bacterial diversity. And here we're doing, the experiments were done in mice, but they humanized the mice. And there's lots of different meanings for humanized mice, but in this case what they're doing is they took mice that didn't have any of their own gut bacteria, and they supplemented them with bacteria from a 36-year-old American that lives in the San Francisco area. And how they gave the mice the bacteria from this guy is that they mixed in the fecal matter from this donor with the water that was given to the mice. Now, don't feel too bad for the mice. Mice are actually corpophagic, meaning they like to eat their own feces. So this isn't too mean to the mice. Now, what they did in their experiments was that they gave the mice a low-fiber diet for 4 generations, and they looked at the diversity of the bacteria in the mice after each successive generation. And what they found is that the diversity reduced upon each generation. And then what they did is they said, well, we're starting to lose different types of bacteria. Are they just low in numbers, or are they extinct? And so they returned the mice to traditional diet that was high in fiber. And after each successive generation, the ability of the mice to get to have those bacteria come back was less and less. And so that suggests that over time your diversity decreases, and your bacteria diversity the way you eat changes the bacteria that your kids get, and even if your kids eat better than you, they don't get improved bacterial diversity. So one thing they did to top off the paper was they did something called fecal transplants, and these are being done in humans right now. But basically they took the feces from the humanized mice that had the traditional diet the whole time and had a rich diversity of bacteria. They gave it to the mice that had lost their diversity, and the diversity came back. So what does this mean? Well, this means that maybe we, over time, what it could mean is that we could improve our health if we got fecal transplants from populations on the earth that still have a high diversity. So maybe we'll get some probiotics along those lines. My other thought was, can we be human lawnmowers? Could humans take probiotics to become plant and grass eaters? If we're missing out on these enzymes that the bacteria encode that can break down the fiber, what if we make bacteria that express high levels of these enzymes that break down fiber? Could we get more usage out of our gut bacteria? So my thought on that is, rather than trying to fix world hunger by improving total typical food supply, maybe we should change our gut microbiota so that we can all eat grass. Talk to you later.